Hey guys, welcome back to another tutorial. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you find all the tips, tricks, and inspiration for your Tumbler journey. So today we're going to work on our very last summer themed Tumbler. We're going to move into fall after this, and we're going to do two actually today. So we're going to be working on two of these prints from Paint Between Dreams. These two patterns are available on the Banff Custom Creations website, and I will list them in the description box below along with all of the discount codes that I have to offer you guys. So we're going to start out with a 12 by 12 sheet of vinyl. I know that this video shows that this is transparent. I realized that I grabbed transparent and I should have grabbed opaque. If you want to do something with some sort of like a glitter peekaboo underneath, you would need to use the transparent or semi-transparent version. If not, if you want to just put this over a spray painted base, you'll want to use the opaque version. Once that's cut down to size, you're going to put the edges together corner to corner so you can make 4 triangles. And then we're going to use 2 of those 4 to make a double V split. For the oranges theme, I'm going to use the 16-ounce Junior from the Tipsy Magnolia, and we're going to mark this at about 4 inches. That size is going to vary depending on what size tumbler you're using, so you'll just need to adjust that accordingly. And I'm just going to use my vinyl cutter here, and I'm going to trim that piece off. And we're going to do a half split on this one, so it's going to be very simple, but we're just going to cut that down to size. We'll apply this vinyl first, and then I'll show you a couple of hacks that I've got up my sleeve. This is totally optional and up to the maker, but I would spray paint this prior to applying the vinyl, just so you don't have to tape off that vinyl after you've applied it to avoid getting any spray paint on the vinyl. So if you spray paint it, let it dry, and then apply it using the hinge method, and we'll go ahead and trim that at the seam once we've got that laid down completely straight, and then we'll move into our glitter. If you aren't aware of what the hinge method is, you would just take your sheet of printed vinyl, trim off about 1 inch of the backing, and get your seams lined up straight. Make sure it's going to be completely straight along the rims, things like that. And then you're going to push the vinyl onto the cup while simultaneously pushing the vinyl backing off. And that is going to allow you to lay it pretty straight. You'll have very minimal bubbling, crinkling, things like that. That is by far my favorite method to apply vinyl. So if you've not tried it, I would definitely recommend doing it. It is a very quick way to even get a full wrap done on a cup. Next, we're just going to trim down those edges so I can make sure that my cup is going to lay completely flat once I use my edge trimmer. If you have excess hanging over, chances are when you flip your cup upside down to use that edge trimmer, it's not going to be laying flat on the edge trimmer surface, and chances are that you're going to end up with a crooked seam. So I just trim that down with my scissors pretty roughly and then go in with my vinyl trimmer. Next, we're gonna go in with some painter's tape. We will use the epoxy method to apply the glitter. I'm just putting this tape down to ensure that we're not going to get any of that epoxy or glitter cross-contaminated into that vinyl. So that just gives me a little bit of a buffer. And then going back to our peach tumbler, I showed you guys this on the transparent. Apparently I included this in the footage twice. This is with the opaque vinyl that I thought I was using the first time. So once we get that cut into, or folded into 4 triangles, we'll go ahead and cut the vinyl into fourths, and we'll take our 2 favorite pieces and we are going to apply those on the cup as well. Once I've got that vinyl cut to size, I am going to keep the backing on the tumbler, and I'm going to just kind of get a rough idea of the sizing that I want, of the gap between the two pieces of vinyl. That's where my glitter is going to lay. And I ended up using a 1.5 inch piece of painter's tape as kind of a seam, I guess I would say, between the two pieces of vinyl. So I made sure to lay this top piece of vinyl along the top rim of the cup, just to ensure that the triangle was going to be completely straight, that it was perfectly straight along the rim, and that's going to set us up for success, especially since we're using painter's tape as kind of a guide to lay down that second portion of the vinyl at the bottom. That's going to ensure that the 2 points of our triangles are going to meet up at the same seam, and they're not going to be offset a little bit. So we're just going to apply that using the hinge method, and we're going to score off that seam and trim that using our X-Acto knife. I would be very careful if you're using this over a spray painted surface. If it's not completely dry, and if you cut your seam and go to pull that little excess piece of vinyl up, sometimes it does lift that paint on the bottom. So just be very cautious that your paint is completely dry. And then next we're going to go in with that painter's tape that I'd mentioned. We want to be very careful to line that up exactly along the rim of the vinyl, the printed vinyl that we had laid down. And that is going to make sure that once everything is all said and done, that, like I had mentioned, the two seams of the tops and bottoms of that triangle point are going to meet up in the same place. Once again, we're going to score that, and wherever those two pieces of painter's tape overlap, that is where you want to cut to create that perfect triangle edge that you're going to see here in just a moment. Next, we're going to take that second triangle piece that we had cut off, and we're going to measure from the point of that triangle. We're going to push that right up to the point of that painter's tape. That is going to ensure that both points, like I had mentioned again, of the triangles are going to be completely in line with one another. And I did use the hinge method to apply this, but I trimmed off a little piece of the backing on the top of the triangle, and then I pushed down the center, and then I worked my way outwards. I didn't go from side to side like I normally would. I went from top to bottom this time because I didn't want to chance any sort of wrinkle or anything like that, or lay it down and chance that it didn't meet at the triangle point where we had started that the hinge method, if that makes sense. So I really wanted to focus on those triangles. I have made a couple of V-slits before, and one of them did not meet up at the seam of the triangle, of the point, I guess I would say, and it was very noticeable. So I'm kind of a stickler about that with myself. I really kind of try to pride myself in making sure those are even. I'm sorry if you can hear a bell in the background. We just got a kitten, and she's tiny, and she has to wear a bell because she gets lost. So if you can hear that, that's what it is. I'm sorry. Anyways, so once that vinyl is laid down and we have that all trimmed up, we are going to pull those edges around the bottom of the cup. Don't pull too hard because it will rip your vinyl. Ask me how I know. But you want to pull just tight enough so it's completely flat around that bottom rim. You don't want any crinkling as it's going around the edge. So we're going to get that trimmed off. We'll pull the tape, and then we're going to go along the bottom as well. And we're going to use the edge trimmer to ensure that we have a clean bottom rim. Now that the bottom edge is all trimmed up, we're gonna pull that little piece of vinyl that we had just trimmed off to expose that completely crisp and clean bottom rim, my favorite. And make sure that we've got all of the vinyl pressed down on all the seams, that the painter's tape didn't lift it up. And we're gonna go in with some painter's tape again, but this time, instead of putting it in that paint portion that's exposed right now, we're gonna go along the edge of the printed vinyl, and we're gonna again use this as a buffer like we did on the orange tumbler to ensure that we're not going to have any glitter or vinyl cross-contamination into the vinyl. So we're gonna lay this down on the edges of the V-split and along the bottom as well. We don't need to do anything with the top because we're not putting glitter up there. But once we've got that all laid down, we're gonna press down to ensure that the seams are completely creased with the vinyl to expose that crisp, clean V-split again. And then I will show you the trick that I have for applying the glitter. Now that we've done all the hard work, we get to play in the glitter. So we are going to use halos, and my entire goal on these tumblers was to produce them quickly without a lot of coats of epoxy. So I'm gonna take the halos glitter and I'm gonna put it in a tea strainer, and we're going to just tap it with scissors, with your hands, whatever you can find, and we're gonna shake out all the extra fine glitters, and we're gonna use those versus using the glitter with the like mixed chunky glitters in it to avoid extra coats of epoxy. So I know on camera it looks like it's a different color, but it's not. I don't know why it looks like that. But we're going to mix up about 15 milliliters of epoxy and then about 5 milliliters of the fine glitter. So I would say either a 0.08 or a 0.15 glitter. So an extra fine or a fine cut will work best for this. I would not recommend using anything bigger than that. It's going to leave gaps in your epoxy because we are going to apply this glitter wet. We're not going to apply it using the epoxy method per se. We're basically going to mix the glitter in to the epoxy, kind of using the cheat glitter method. So still applying it using epoxy, but not really the true epoxy method that you would normally think of when somebody says that. So I'm just gonna mix up Flynn Sisters regular, nope, I'm lying, not regular setting, fast setting epoxy And I mixed up a bunch of extra because I was just glittering other cups, so just ignore that. But I put about 15 mLs in my cup. I did not use all of that for these 2 cups. I probably could have gotten away with like 10 milliliters and maybe 3 to 4 milliliters of glitter. But again, that's gonna vary depending on the size of the cup that you're using and the design that you're doing. So I've got halos in the one, and then the other lighter kind of peachy color is Fuzzy Navel. Both of these are from Peachy Glitters. As always, I have a discount code for you guys in the description box. So we're gonna mix those up until it is thoroughly mixed into the epoxy. You're gonna wanna apply this right away, especially if you're using a fast setting epoxy, and especially if you're mixing a bigger batch of epoxy. It does tend to flash cure, so just ensure that that is not sitting for very long. It will flash cure, get gummy on you. This one does have a little bit of a longer working time, but don't mess around and not apply it right away. Also, side note, I thought I was recording, so I completely missed me applying the Fuzzy Navel glitter to the tumbler. So we're just gonna pretend like you guys saw that. But I did realize before I glittered the orange tumbler and started recording. So we are going to apply this to the tumbler with the tape on. And I would recommend, once you get this applied, dragging your finger very lightly while you're applying it. If you're pressing firmly as you're applying it, it's going to kind of drag the glitter off and leave you with empty spaces in your epoxy. So you'll see like streaks of just spray paint underneath. Here comes my kitten again. So just be cautious of that. And it does look like it is super micro bubbly. That does go away. It's just because we're kind of working with the epoxy. It will go away as it spins. Also, once you torch it, it loses a lot of those bubbles. So don't be too worried if that happens. And we are going to let this spin after it's applied for, I would say, probably 10 to 15 minutes, as long as you applied the epoxy right away and you didn't let it sit in a cup for a little bit and go do other tasks. So I kept this spinning for 20 minutes, and that was too long. It was just long enough to kind of stick to the tape. So I would not recommend doing that. I would say 10 to 15 minutes max if it's fast setting. If it's a regular setting, I would say maybe 30 to 45 minutes. And then you can pull the tape, but we want to make sure that it's set up just enough that when you pull the tape, it's not going to bleed into the vinyl that we worked really hard to get those crisp lines on. If you pulled the tape too late like I did, they may have little pokey bits sticking up that cured to the epoxy or started to cure to the epoxy. If that happens to you, just take your heat gun quickly. Don't hold it too long because it will reactivate that epoxy and it will start to kind of melt into the vinyl. But just very quickly kind of brush it over the exposed areas that are causing you problems, and it will kind of lay itself back down flat. I decided to do a glitter booty on the orange themed tumbler, so I used a metal pick and a hammer, and I just wedged it in the seam of that little cap at the bottom of the Tipsy Magnolia cup and tapped it a couple of times and it popped right loose. And then I'm gonna mix up some UV resin with Mojito from Peachy Glitters. I used about 10, maybe 12 milliliters of UV resin to probably 4 to 5 milliliters of epoxy, glitter into my epoxy. And then we're just gonna apply that right into that cavity. That did leave a little bit of a gap. It didn't fill all the way full, which is what I want because we need to account for the epoxy being placed onto the tumbler, the normal epoxy. And if you're filling that too full, you're gonna have a rocky tumbler because it's going to be kind of bulged at the bottom. So just be cautious of that. But we're gonna use the UV lamp to cure that for probably about 3 minutes. It is going to be a little bit thick, so we want to make sure that that's cured all the way through so we don't have any wet epoxy seeping through. And then I'm going to be extra, and I didn't have any glitter vinyl to match the green that is on the peach vinyl, so we're going to make our own. So what I did, I took a comparable green vinyl that I thought would kind of match the glitter that we're using. We're going to use Aleene's Tack It and apply that onto the vinyl that is taped to my surface. We're gonna spread that on the vinyl and then hit it with the heat gun until that glue is completely clear. Once it's clear and streak free, we're gonna apply Linderr, again from Peachy SVG, and we're going to rub this until it is completely smooth. So like you're using the tack it method, if you've ever done that, you want it to be almost completely smooth. Once it is, we're going to take our chip brush and brush away any excess glitter that may fall off and repeat the same process. So we're going to apply the tack it, make sure it's streak free, and hit that with the heat gun until it is completely clear again, and apply a second coat of Linderr just to make sure that there is no vinyl that is beneath the glitter that is exposing itself through any of the gaps of glitter that may present itself. I did have quite a few gaps in that first layer of glitter, so I would definitely recommend a second coat of glitter unless you're using some sort of an ultra fine glitter. That typically can take one coat and it won't expose any of the vinyl underneath the glitter. So we're going to repeat that. We're going to make it completely smooth, brush it off once more, and then once that excess is all brushed away and the tack it is completely dry, we're going to stick that back on the surface, and I'm going to apply 2 coats of polycrylic over top of that green glitter just to make sure that there is no glitter getting out from that vinyl that is going to cross-contaminate onto our printed vinyl. So we're gonna let that dry, set that aside, and work on our decals. So I cut out this little cutie orange decal with a white offset at 0.05 inches. The decal with the offset included, both of them actually, are going to be 4 inches wide. And I'm going to take the peachy decal that I've got going on here, and it comes with the green and the gold section, but I offset that by 0.05 as well, just because I wanted to tie that into the word just, and that is going to be gold textured vinyl with a white offset. So I created that extra white offset underneath peachy just so it was cohesive and kind of tied into that first little section of decal there. So we're gonna lay that down using the hinge method. I hate measuring things, so I just eyeball everything. But once you're laying that peachy decal down, if you're using that glitter hack to create a glittery decal, I would not recommend rubbing your decal on to apply it to the cup. I would recommend just kind of pressing it down with your hand. That's gonna prevent any of the glitter from getting out again onto the vinyl. So the end goal is the crisp, clean lines, and if you haven't figured it out by now, that's the only way I do things. So don't rub things, just tap them. And I was very strategic in laying this polycrylic down. I saved the glitter vinyl for last because I didn't want to contaminate any of that glitter onto the vinyl again. And that was the very last thing that I laid down. So as long as your polycrylic is still wet, you can then remove any pieces that may have transferred glitter onto the vinyl. Just pick them with your glove. We're gonna let that dry for about 30 minutes. Go over it with our very first coat of epoxy, and then we can go into our line work. So at this point, we only have one true coat of epoxy. We obviously applied the glitter with the epoxy mixed into it, but we really only have one full coat of epoxy over this. So the entire goal, like I mentioned in the beginning, was to produce a fast kind of process tumbler with minimal coats of epoxy. So we had all of the vinyl, all of the glitter laid down before we even had a true coat of epoxy. That's pretty good if you ask me. So now that we've got all of the little pokey bits sanded up, there should be very minimal pokey bits sanded up. What in the world? Sticking up is what I meant to say. I need to go to bed. So I'm just going to buff those out a little bit along the edges just to make sure that you can't see any pokey bits sticking up under the vinyl line work. We're going to clean that up with the 91% rubbing alcohol. And then for the peach tumbler, I cut my vinyl stripes out in textured gold metallic at 0.06 by 11.5 width. And then for the orange tumbler, I used the 0.08 by 11.5 width sizing for that. So we're just gonna apply those along the glitter and vinyl seams, and we are going to make sure that our triangle points are still lined up as the vinyl striping is laid down. Once it is, we're gonna put the tumblers back on the turner and put on one final coat of polycrylic just to make sure that vinyl work stays laid down flat. Because it is very thin line work, it does tend to lift pretty easily under epoxy. So we're just gonna do our due diligence and make sure that that is gonna stay in place before we get that final coat of epoxy put on the tumbler. I mixed up 60 mLs of Flynn Sisters regular setting epoxy as my final coat. We only have 2 coats of epoxy on both of these tumblers, and you're welcome to add a little bit of extra fine glitter additive to the final coat if you want to shimmer up that printed vinyl at all. But after that final coat was completely cured, this cup was done. So let me know what you guys thought in the comments. Sorry, this was a very long-winded tutorial, but there were a lot of tips and tricks in here. I hope you guys find those useful. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit that bell button if you want to get notified of future tutorials. And I will see you guys next weekend.